Hey, this is Andrew. I'm here bringing you another Keyforge deck reveal. This one is Ulagan Grim Pass Wrongdoer, which is kind of a cool name. Yeah, he certainly does some wrongdoing. So this is an Untamed Shadows disc deck, and I opened it today at a Learn to Play event at one of my local stores. That then went to an Archon Solo event with a lot of the newcomers to the game, which was very exciting. And it had been announced that it would be chainbound. It ended up not being chainbound. And just to be, sporting with the newcomers, I decided to go with the deck that I'd opened at the Learn to Play event. So treated it more like a sealed event. Yeah, it ended up being a really fun deck that definitely has some good strengths to it. We'll talk about some of the weaknesses as well. But yeah, let's go. Oh, it went. So this deck went 3-1 today out of 16 people, and the one deck that it lost to ended up going 4-0. Ended up being the top deck at the event, and after that game went fairly quickly. We finished it up, and then I said, "Hey, let's." It was close. I had 2 keys out, and I said, "Okay, do you want to play another game casually?" And so we did, and that game actually went my way with well, I'll spoil this card, with a key charge win. So I know it can do even better than it did, but yeah, managed to go 3-1, and that was really great. And the guy who went 4-0 was one of the newcomers to the game. I would say the field at the event was about half newcomers and half regulars, so that was pretty exciting and really nice to see one of the newcomers win. That's a fun thing, and I mean he clearly, he definitely understood what he was doing. It wasn't a fluke that he won, but yeah, fun to see that. So anyway, so here's Ulagan Grim Pass Wrongdoer. We'll start with Dis and A Fair Game. And this is my first deck that has this card, and so it was kind of interesting for me to actually finally have a chance to play it. And when I opened it up and I was re-familiarizing myself with the card, my initial thought was, wow, this card seems not very good. And it certainly can end up bad. I had one play of it that gave my opponent 2 amber and me none. That made me sad. But where it really shines is if you can get into a situation where you're playing 6 discards out of your hand, and this is the last one, so that you have nothing in your hand and your opponent has some things. Then there's a chance that you can get some amber out of them, and you're guaranteed that they can't get any out of you if you have no cards left in your hand. And then obviously the fewer cards left in your hand when you play this, the less amber your opponent is likely to get. So yeah, so you can play this really well, but it works best if you can save it till you can play it with very few cards in your hand. And and yeah, just in case for people who aren't familiar with the text, A Fair Game says that basically you and your opponent each discard the top card of your deck. Then you have to reveal your hand, and for however many cards in your opponent's hand match the card that was match the house of the card that was discarded off the top of their deck, you get that many amber. And for however many cards are in your hand that matched the top card of your deck, you get your opponent gets amber. And it's really not a fair game because you have the opportunity to dump your hand before you play it. Okay, next up is Arise, and Arise can be pretty powerful. So it's an action where you choose a house and return each creature of that house from a discard pile to your hand, and then gain a chain. In this deck, you'll see the problem with Arise in this deck is actually that there are only 3 Dis creatures, and so it ends up usually not being such a good play to play this in named Dis. There's certain cases, this has a lot of untamed creatures and some synergy there, so it's definitely possible to get really good value that way, but that means you have to wait till the next turn, so you're missing some draws. That's not typically how I want Arise to go, although I did do that at least once to really good effect. So anyway, hurt a little bit by the lack of disc creatures in this deck, but potentially still a good card. Okay, next up we have 2 copies of Fear. Fear is an action that returns an enemy creature to its owner's hand. This is so-so. Lights Out is probably better from Shadows because it gains you an Amber and does this to 2, although it has to be 2. You can't, there's no up to. This you can either choose to use it or not. Really good way to get rid of upgrades like Blood of Titans. You push the card back to the owner's hand, the upgrade gets discarded. There are cards with play effects. Usually this isn't so good on, so you just have to be discerning. I think the only time that I discarded this, it was because my opponent didn't have creatures. Generally, I was able to find good targets for this, so still pretty good. It's just not as exciting as Lights Out. Okay, next we have Hand of Dis, which is an action that just discards or destroys a creature that's not on a flank. There's only one of this in here. One of this is actually pretty good. I like it, and I especially like having it with Fear because if my opponent has 3 creatures out, and this deck doesn't do really hard board control, so it's not shocking if my opponent has 3 creatures for me to deal with. I can use Hand of Dis to get rid of one of them, at least one of them, one of them, and then use Fear to get rid of one of the ones that was on the flank. So pretty good deal there. We have 2 copies of Mind Barb. Mind Barb is fun. You gain an Amber, and then your opponent discards a random card from their hand. I've talked about this before. I think this is 2/3 of the time, or something like that. The exact math is not quite that, but some percentage of the time this is good for your opponent. So that's, but it feels bad. It definitely disrupts them. The best option is if you can get 2 of this. That's going to be pretty good. Because at that point you've knocked your opponent down to 4 cards in their hand. There's a decent chance you really disrupted their gameplay. This is a little bit counter-synergistic with a fair game, because if your opponent has fewer cards in their hand, there are fewer cards to potentially match. And you don't really want to leave it in your hand, because if the top card of your deck that you end up discarding is Dis, then the Mind Barb would give your opponent an Amber. So it really is straight counter synergy with fair game. But that's okay. Mind Barb is still a fun card. It's just not a really powerful card. This is, though, we have 3 Fates. So 3 Fates gains you an Amber, and you destroy the 3 most powerful creatures. That is actually pretty good. And especially if you are, again, not really solid on the board control side, this is a way to catch up a little bit. And I had a couple nice clutch plays with this that really helped. So 3 Fates, yeah, quite good. Counter synergistic with Shadow Self, which we'll see later, but it's okay. Usually I could find at least some good targets for it. Then we have Dominator Bauble, which is an artifact that exhausts to let you use a friendly creature. This is really good. I really liked having this in this deck. I was able to have targets for it, and yeah, really happy with that. And then we have 2 copies of the Terror, which is 5 power, and when you play it, if your opponent has no Amber, you gain 2. So, okay, turn 1 play. I'm trying to think how many times during the event this actually triggered, and it might be 0 times. It really didn't happen. There were a couple times I thought it maybe would happen. I think this is best if you compare it with a card like Charette that can get their Amber out of play, so that, if you have Charette and the Terror in your hand, you can, if their Amber is anywhere from 0 to 3, you can play the Charette first and then play the Terror and you'll get the 2, but without that support it's a little rough. And then lastly, our 3rd disc creature, we have Toxin, which is a little weak, but 3 power, Reap, and your opponent discards a random card from their hand. And yeah, I mean, if you can get a turn where you do this and 2 Mind Barbs, that's pretty cool, but that's a lot of setup. All right, on to shadows. So yeah, I just think like the disc set here is just not fantastic. Although Fair Game worked out to be really nice, and some of the board control stuff was okay. I just wish there was a stronger creature setup to work with that Arise. Okay, next we're into shadows. We have 2 copies of Ghostly Hand, which gains 2 amber, and if your opponent has exactly 1 amber, you steal it. This benefits a lot from support from cards like Urchin and Fagin and Naughty Dodger, ways to, Relentless Whispers, cards that let you steal 1. So if your opponent is at, let's say, 3, maybe you have a couple cards that steal 1 and drop you down to where this can steal that last one. That just didn't happen a lot, but it's still great amber generation even when that doesn't happen. Then we have Imperial Trader, which is an action that gains you an amber. You look at your opponent's hand and you can choose and purge a Sanctum card. Even if they don't have a Sanctum card, even if they aren't playing Sanctum, you still get to see their hand, which can be okay, and you get the amber, so it's not a bad card. And I did manage today to purge a Virtuous Works with this, which is a pretty good value. Next up, Pawn Sacrifice. Gain an amber. Sacrifice a friendly creature. If you do, you deal 2 damage each to 2 creatures. Yeah, good if you have creatures that are really sacrificable. This works really well with Naughty or Bad Penny, neither of which is in this deck, but I still found ways to use it. In one case, I actually just soaked up a lot of damage from other things with a Shadow Self to the point where I had 8 damage, and then went ahead and on my turn went Shadows, reaped with it, and then Pawn Sacrificed, and worked out pretty nice. Next, we have Poison Wave. Gain an amber, deal 2 damage to each creature. Decent, white potential, get rid of a lot of things, a lot of your own things. Seeker Needle. Exhaust to deal a damage to a creature, and if that damage destroys the creature, you gain an amber. That's pretty good. And now we're into our Shadows creature set, which is it's not amazing, but it's pretty good. We have Naughty the Thief, which gives you which is elusive, 2 power, and can exhaust to steal 1. That is pretty cool. Old Bruno has elusive and capture 3 when you play him. That can be pretty clutch depending on the situation. You can keep your opponent off a key. And my Bruno tended to stay on the board a lot. Dodger is 5 power and has fight, steal 1. The trick here is, you want him to be able to stay in and keep fighting as long as possible. And that's where these Shadow Selves come in. There are 2 of them in here. And that actually is a really strong setup. If you can get, you have the Shadow Selves, so you get the Dodger in between them. He can do a lot of work. You have a Naughty on one side of one. It's going to help that stay in. That actually works out really nicely. And Umbra is okay to stick next to 1/2. Umbra has Skirmish, so he's not going to take damage when he fights anyway, but that just protects him from getting nuked by something else. And in the event I played today, the people I played with didn't have a lot of just straight up destroy. There was one lady with 2 copies of Gateway to Dis. That was pretty crazy, but other than that, there wasn't a lot of just straight up destroy effects floating around. So the Shadow Selves did quite a lot of work keeping these things on the board, and that helped a lot. All right. Lastly, we're going to go into Untamed, and we have Key Charge, of course. You play it, you lose an amber, and if you do, you can forge a key at current cost. Great for using up your amber so that it can't be stolen. Nocturnal Maneuver, gain an amber, and then exhaust up to 3 creatures. Really good temporary board control. Regrowth, gain an amber, and return a creature from your discard pile to your hand. This gave me, I got good value out of this. This can be really nice. It's like Arise. I feel like Regrowth is best if you use it with an Untamed creature. It can work pretty well. Getting a Shadow Self back can be pretty good, but there's some Untamed creatures that I tended to, I think, have higher priority, partly because I could just get them straight back on the board. Vigor gains an amber, and then you can heal up to 3 damage from a creature. If you healed 3 damage, then gain an amber. There was a case where I actually used the fact that my opponents. Oh, this was actually the casual game where I won with Key Charge. I had 3 amber, and I played a Dust Pixie that got me up to 5, and then Vigor, and my opponent had a Brobnar creature, a Baldur, I think, with like 4 damage on it, so I healed it to get me up to 7, and then Key Charged. So this can actually work out really well, especially if your timing is right, even if you have to heal your opponent's creatures. 2 copies of Ancient Bear, that is pretty decent board control. They deal well with the 2-power elusive creatures because of that Assault 2 that applies and is not blocked by the elusive. And if you need to do 7 damage to something, then you can. So it works out pretty nicely. And actually, well, yeah, it works out pretty nice. Then we have Dust Pixie, only 1 power, but gains you 2 amber when you play it. Snufflegator, 4 power with Skirmish, that's pretty good. We have a Mermook, 3 power, and your opponent's keys cost an extra amber. That is pretty strong as well. Niffle Ape, I think we have 2 Niffle Apes here, yeah. 3 power, and when it's attacking, ignore Taunt and Elusive. I always forget that, and it's actually pretty strong to be able to ignore Taunt and Elusive. I used this to kill a Mac the Knife. I used it to kill an old Bruno. There are, a bunch of good applications for just ignoring Taunt and Elusive, and usually those things are good trades. And then lastly, we have Hunting Witch. So this Untamed creature set is actually pretty decent. If you can get the Hunting Witch next to a Shadow Self, so it has a good chance to stay on the board. You get, you can play the other houses and still be getting the value out of it. And then I won 1 game by basically on my second to last turn using Arise to pull. I had Key Charge in my hand, and I used Arise to pull all my Untamed creatures back into my hand, including Hunting Witch. And then on the next turn, they got up to where they had 6. But on my turn, I led with the Hunting Witch, played all my other creatures, and easily got up to where, actually, I think they had a Grabber Jammer out, but I got up to 8, so I was able to use Key Charge to lose 1 and still forge for 7. And I had a couple left over too. So that can be, the Arise with this stuff is pretty good. But again, I'd rather have a strong disc setup to use it for. So yeah, this worked pretty well. A lot of it is a little vulnerable to AoE damage effects like not with Nerve Blast, but the Poison Wave or Ammonia Clouds, things like that. Kind of do a lot of work against this deck. Although I was able, if I had a Hunting Witch next to Shadow Self or whatever, I could still use the Shadow Wave and or the Poison Wave and have the Hunting Witch survive. And ultimately it does really well at the Amber ramping and then into Key Charge. The Shadows does decent Amber control, but I felt like it was really the Untamed that shined here, and the Dis just gave a little bit of good board control, but like I said, there's a lot of ways it could have been better. But having said all that, it did pretty well. It got 3-1 during the event, and I don't feel like that's because anybody played poorly. I think the deck just was able to keep up pretty well, so that was good. To the new players out there getting into the game, thanks for showing up, and hope you had a good time and want to stick around. And to the old players, thanks for showing up and helping the youngsters. I'll see you around. And to everybody watching, thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed the video and keep forging.